Returning to geopolitics and empire is Iain Davis to discuss his latest book, which you can get on pre-order right now. It's not out yet. I just finished reading it. It's amazing. My favorite topic is titled The Technocratic Dark State, Trump, AI, and Digital Dictatorship. What's up, Iain?
I'm all good, mate. How are you? Nice to be here again. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and for people who aren't aware, you're a past contributor to Geopolitics and Empire. In fact, let me just share my screen real quick. Here it is. So yeah, people can follow you on your website, iaindavis.com. There, that takes people to your Substack. They can support you and all that. You were just on Sonia Poulton, who was my former colleague on TNT Radio for a brief moment in time. And then you've contributed to Unlimited Hangout and Geopolitics and Empire on everything from Israel-Gaza stuff to China social credit to some of this technocratic dark state stuff. And so, yeah, tell us about your new book.
Yeah, so it focuses on the group of Silicon Valley oligarchs that are behind the Trump administration, and I would strongly suggest, and I'd point to the evidence in the book, that they are basically in control, I would suggest, of that administration. Certainly, if you look at how the policies that Trump they've been pushing, they are very favourable to this group of oligarchs. It's precisely what they want. Many of his executive orders, it could have practically been written by that group. Indeed, they are involved with things like Project 2025, some of them, which did effectively write many of those executive orders. They were so similar that you could argue that they came straight out of the Project 2025 think tank. But the book it explores their ideology. The first third of the book is about the ideology that this group of people have adopted, and they've definitely adopted technocracy. I mean, Elon Musk is probably the best known technocrat, and somebody who is personally got a personal history going back to his grandfather Joshua Haldeman, who he's had a lifelong involvement with technocracy and has openly discussed that it's something that he wants to pursue and something that he would like to see come to pass. And then on them, there's another group of people with a similar view. They follow something called the neo-reactionary movement, and I very much Peter Thiel is a leading light in that. It's not something that he openly discusses, but he's constantly referenced by the neo-reactionary group, and he's more or less echoed almost precisely many of the talking points of the neo-reactionaries, and they follow a quasi-philosophical movement and philosophical treatise that was written by a guy called Nick Land called The Dark Enlightenment. And together, this group, who we could say that that they've adopted both the neo-reactionary side of ideas and technocracy. They're bringing this together, and they're running the global corporations, companies like Palantir and Oracle, and the investors, people like Andreessen Horowitz, and companies like Anduril and OpenAI, so people like Sam Altman as well, and Palmer Luckey. They are implementing currently in the US through the Trump administration, but also through the global network of which they are a part, the kind of technological infrastructure that will implement something else that I discuss, and I know that what I've called the digital panopticon, the control grid. And they're not only are they financially, ideologically, and in some cases even spiritually committed to this very strange philosophy. They're putting in the they have the technical capability, and the reach of their corporations is sufficient to actually build the physical architecture that will make that a reality. So that's the book is very much about that, and it's about how certainly at a global governance level, this is all stemming from what is clearly a global effort to introduce this digital control grid globally.
Yeah, it's 20 chapters. Like I said, thanks for the review copy. I just finished reading all 20 chapters, and I've been Peter Gabriel. Some people may be aware. His latest album is from 2023, I.O., but I've been loving it. And the first song is on the album is Panopticon, which I think is it's actually very good. And he's sort of speaking to what your book talks about. And I pulled up one of my notes I had from reading your book, where you just mentioned Project 2025, and you say in your book, Project 2025 methodology actually subverts representative democracy by further empowering oligarchs and diminishing the political authority of the people. And just to sort of get this out of the way, because you're touching on my first question, which is, the technocrats, who are they, their history, their network. You talk about it in the book. A lot of us are familiar by now, Musk's grandfather, Technocracy Inc., all that sort of stuff that overlaps with Davos and all these other groups you mentioned in your book, Club of Rome. It just goes on and on and on. But can we say that de facto, I think it should be clear now, that the Trump administration is the embodiment of the technocratic dark state? And many guests that I have on, I was recently had a prominent Croatian anti-globalist dissident that I sat down with in Croatia. So, who says, he likes Orban. People like some of these different figures, but he admitted that globally there is no political opposition to technocracy. So Orban maybe is pushing back on cultural, trans issues and migration, but he's not saying nothing about technocracy. In fact, he's making deals with China and Belt and Road. And so, just to get this out of the way, what would you say is Trump de facto? I mean, it's technocratic deep state. He's effectively a new world order agent. No.
Yeah, I mean, I don't to what degree he's aware of that. I don't know. I think Trump is probably quite. I mean, I don't know him, so I can't talk about what he's like personally. But from his public persona, you can imagine that he would be quite easy to manipulate. If you appeal to his ego, if you appeal to his narcissism, you could wheel him out in front of any camera and he'll say whatever he's told to say, as long as he thinks that he's coming out, he looks good doing it. So I'm not to what extent he's actually au fait with some of the things that he has talked about, such as, for example, we might talk about them freedom cities. Whether he realizes what that means, I don't know. But certainly the that group, and some people refer to them as the PayPal mafia, but they're Silicon Valley movers and shakers who have captured and fund. I mean, even financially. I mean, I think Musk put something like $250 million into getting Trump into the White House. He knows he's going to get that money back. He's already got that back and more in the contracts that he's got from the government. So I mean, it's not like he's spending to accumulate in that sense. But definitely that his administration is pushing forward with things that we might have traditionally thought of in terms of things like sustainable development goals, which this group say they're opposed to. The Trump administration is advancing aspects of that faster than the maybe the Soros clique that I know a lot of Americans thought they were voting against when they elected Trump. Effectively, Trump is, and I mean this in a genuine sense, is accelerating that agenda. And it's quite remarkable, really, that we see with people like Orban and we see this rise of what could be described as the techno-populist. So this notion of a popular figure representing the voice of the people, supposedly against central global governance control and oligarch control, who are actually bringing about a transformation, the digital transformation, which essentially is what sustainable development is aiming towards, are bringing that about faster than than even perhaps if we think about the kind of left-leaning kind of oligarch class thought possible. And one of the things that I discuss in the book is that they're offering a sales pitch to their global oligarch partners, and they are partners. For example, Thiel and Karp, that the CEO and the chairman of the board of Palantir both sit on the steering committee at the Bilderberg Group. So they're all part of the same clique, but they're offering a different pathway to achieve this digital transformation, which is what the UN is very much committed to. So they've got a different way of getting to the same ends, and they are appealing to a different demographic. But the outcome is the same. The outcome is digital control.
Yeah, and just to go further then on that point, to have you explain sort of their plan, you write, quote, "The worldwide implementation of technocracy today is without a doubt the most terrifying, totalitarian, and lethal threat to liberty that the people on this planet have ever faced. To describe the danger level as unprecedented would be an understatement." I fully agree with you. And in fact, I focus more on these topics of technocracy and oligocracy, and a bit less on geopolitics, because I feel like what you're writing about, what we're talking about, geopolitics has floated into the background because the dark state is the agenda by all states now across the planet. And so you talk about many things. So these technocrats basically want to be king, want to rule. It's like no different than, you can call it monarchies of the past. And it's funny, they talk about they want pecking rights. So they create a hierarchy, maybe even like a caste system. And you mentioned Howard Scott. It's funny how they say, oh, us technocrats should have, these greater pecking rights. But you mentioned in your book, I think in passing, that Howard Scott was a fraudster. So it's like, these con men, so you guys are so great and you're supposed to be like ethical, but you're fraudsters, you're con men, and you're selling us this demented idea. And then, it's these continental blocks that they want to form, and create basically the currency would be based on a price system, kind of like the bitcoins. If you want to tell us a bit more about what their ultimate aims are.
Yeah, so I think if we look at what technocracy tried to do, it's to centralize control over the distribution of all resources. So if you've got centralized control over the distribution of all resources, so that means, and I mean all, so everything from the food on your plate, the water that you drink, to the energy you consume, to the materials you need to build a house, everything. They want to control everything centrally. Now, when that was first envisaged in the 1930s, there was no practical sense in which that was possible. People wouldn't have been able to manage that system. It would have been without digital technology, manually, moving bits of paper around in an office. Half the nation would have had to been involved in the bureaucracy to manage themselves. It was quite silly. But I think even at the time, the technocrats of the time, people like Howard Scott, knew that. They were aware that it couldn't be applied yet. Now, best part of 100 years later now. So we're nearly a century on. The technological capability to enable that to happen exists. So the idea of the digital control grid really hasn't changed that much. The idea is to centrally control the distribution of all resources, but to do it on an individual level, which would have been technically difficult, is now technically possible. So you can individually prescribe what access people have to things like finance, to things like money itself. And if we move to a point which is something that companies like OpenAI and companies like Tether, that are heavily backed by venture capital firms like Andreessen Horowitz, which is led by people like Mark Andreessen, who openly states that he's an accelerationist, which means he openly states that he is committed to the ideas in the dark enlightenment. They are pushing forward the adoption of that infrastructure that will enable them to control that down to the individual level. So, for example, you can't buy meat, or you can't buy fuel of a certain type because you've exceeded your carbon footprint or your carbon allowance for the week or whatever. Now, hitherto, with that, it wouldn't have been possible to do that. Technologically, it would have been very difficult to do that. People would just forge their money certificates or whatever, which was the original idea of technocracy. But today, with digital ID, if we adopt digital identity, and if we take on these digital ID systems and we subscribe to them, that means that in short order, we will get programmable digital currency linked to our digital ID. And then we are in deep trouble, because, if you can't buy food, or you can't buy energy, or you can't buy the things that you need to live without complying, because it's dependent upon your digital ID, which is the system that they're trying to introduce globally. So this is not just in the US. We were talking briefly off air earlier. He said the same kind of things happening in Mexico. The same is happening in the UK. The same is happening in the EU, in Russia, in China, everywhere. It's happening everywhere at the same time. So yeah, they're now in a position where they can start implementing technocracy successfully, which they up until probably a couple of decades ago, even, they probably couldn't have done it, but they can now. And AI is the game changer for that, because AI enables huge data sets to be meaningfully interpreted. Whereas, without AI, it's difficult to see how that could have been possible. But AI enables that to happen.
Yeah, those are effectively the replacing the manpower that they would have needed under the Soviet or Nazi totalitarian systems, that they didn't have enough. But now at least AI, you'll get false positives, and so if people get an account frozen, you contact support, and then they'll have a human look at it. If it was an error, they might fix it, that AI error, or if you're deemed guilty, AI has correctly in their mind found you guilty of thought crime and correctly debanked you or frozen your account. Then it's working as they want it to work. And I just wanted to, I mentioned this in the past podcast, but maybe you haven't heard it yet. Just 2 weekends ago, I was talking to some Mexicans here that I know who live on the outskirts of town, and they're of a lower socioeconomic, whatever you call it, level. And in the mall where they live was, I kid you not, like I couldn't believe it, Sam Altman's WorldCoin, now rebranded as World, offering 400 pesos, roughly $20, to lower income Mexicans to scan give up their irises and biometrics, and open up a World wallet and digital ID. And some folks from my own church, and I'm thinking, like, I mean, you're Christians, you read the Bible, like the Bible alludes to this sort of stuff. I'm like, you should be the first people to say no, and they weren't aware. And I mean, it was the teenage daughter, so she wasn't clued in on this stuff. And so, anyways, just to give you an example of how far-reaching Sam Altman's world is already here in Mexico, operating in rural areas. And just to ask you more on the ideology, you mentioned the neo-reactionaries, this ruling entity, Curtis Yarvin, Nick Land. They have all of these funky terms like orbital authority, the cathedral, and then you cite Curtis Yarvin talking about virtualizing the wards, the us black sheep,
wards, yeah,
virtual genocide. So if people who are disabled, you mentioned, who have no economic worthiness, you think of Bernard Shaw or John Cusack in Utopia, where you have to earn your day. If you can't be productive today, and we're going to call you. And his thing is just we're going to shut you in a room, throw virtual reality on you, and basically you're going to be living in a bug pod. So just if you could tell us a bit more about the ideology of this ruling sort of PayPal mafia elite technocratic dark state class.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things I've looked at it from two angles in the book. I've looked at it from, let's assume that they do believe it, or also let's assume that they're willing to use it because it suits their purposes. Do they really have this ideological commitment to this thing, the Dark Enlightenment, or is it just convenient because it enables them to say, well, we've got some sort of ideology underpinning everything we're doing. Um, And one thing else that I stress as well throughout the book is nothing. This isn't new. This is really basic kind of eugenics, and it goes back all the way back to Plato. It's the guardians of the republic. It's the same old story of a select few controlling the lives of everybody else. That's what it essentially boils down to. But there are some aspects of the Dark Enlightenment which, if you think that these people, let's say they are committed to it, and you have to say, when you look at the kind of technological infrastructure that they're rolling out, the danger is that they may be, that things like us, we are considered in the Dark Enlightenment to be, or what we should be, is technoplastic beings, which means transhuman, that we need to be transformed into something else to cope with their existential threat, which they say is the singularity, the point at which technology outstrips the human being's ability to evolve with it. So technology becomes a threat to us because it's more than we'll ever be. So we're in trouble. Technology starts to see us as vermin. So in order to avoid that, we have to meld with it, they claim, become what Nick Land, one of the philosophers behind or specifically behind the Dark Enlightenment, called technoplastic beings. So we have to be genetically engineered, and as well as transhuman, but cybernetically engineered, to become capable of withstanding the rigors of the singularity. But within that, it's also extremely elitist. So Land argues that there'll be this divergence between those that can afford the best cutting edge genetic enhancement and cybernetic implants, and those that can't. And which is very similar to, we've seen, people like Eric Schmidt and Ray Kurzweil and people like that make Yuval Harari, people like that make very similar arguments, but they're from the other side of the camp. But it's the same argument, but dressed up with different reference points, really. But they're basically making the point that we can be changed, controlled, programmed in order for our elite masters, what they would call the founders of a network state, or the ones with sufficient permissions to administer the blockchain upon which everything will be based, so that they can control us and extract, in Dark Enlightenment terms, what they call sovereign rent from us. So our only function really in the thinking of the Dark Enlightenment is because everything can be automated. So all farming processes, for example, can be automated. You can print apples. You don't have to grow them. Everything can be delivered by AI, and everything can be delivered by robots. Human beings aren't really in the loop. They're not in the loop for any of the manufacturing processes they envisage. They're not really in the loop for any of the financial decision making. Nothing administrative work. All that will be done by AI. Mark Anderson says AI is our philosopher's stone. So they give AI a almost kind of like godlike quality, and they worship it. And they think that basically the wards, what Curtis Yarvin was talking about, were the people that were not productive, i.e. they weren't able to extract sufficient sovereign rent from them. So he was talking about people like unemployed people, people with disabilities that are perhaps on welfare support because they can't work for their disability or for whatever reason. Single people that are not producing anymore, they're old. So he's talking about all the people that most of us know and live with, and some of us are uh, that we're useless unless they can extract sufficient sovereign rent from us. That we would be useless. So his problem with genocide is not that it's morally wrong; it's that it's bad PR. He sort of jokingly said, this is this American counterpart to the guy that we were talking about earlier, Nick Land, Curtis Yarvin, who is very close to Peter Thiel. Um, he argued that genocide's a bit bad for PR. If you go around just killing people en masse, it doesn't look great. So better to wall them up like bee larvae inside a virtual cell, and isolate them, which would drive them insane were it not for the fact that they're in a fully immersed virtual reality system. So basically, if you think about the Matrix, that dystopian sci-fi moment where the main character Neelix wakes up in the kind of pod and realizes that his whole life has been a virtual reality. These guys think that's possible and are trying to set about making that happen. And they mean it metaphorically. I mean, one of the things that you quickly realize when you read a lot of their stuff is they use metaphors a lot. So they're always talking in metaphors, but nonetheless, the ambition is there to remove the wards, the unproductive people, just dispense with them, basically. I mean, and if that means if they're genetically enhanced, not genetically enhancing them, sterilizing them, ensuring that they don't continue. But I think the important thing is that what they believe is that the solution to humanity's problems, and all of them believe this. It's not just the kind of the more kind of extreme musings of the philosophical wing. All of them have argued this at various points, that the solutions to humanity's problems is really just to end humanity, just to end it, just turn it into something else. That's always what it comes back to. That they just want to get rid of us, but they also want to be kind of the supreme rulers of what's left.
Yeah, and just to add, you mentioned having everyone on virtual reality. In some ways, a large portion of the public is already there with just the screens alone, from children to teenagers to middle age to elderly. The screens are effectively, they're not attached to their face, but it's as if they were. They're 10 hours a day with the screen, whether it's computer or a phone on them. So they're just one step removed from that sort of virtual reality Oculus device. And I was just going to add that, perhaps people such as yourself, myself, and a good portion of the listeners will effectively be relegated to a ward by hook or crook, because if we get kicked out of this softcore, denied access, think about it. I have no more internet to do this. Can't access my bank account, so I'm stuck here in my room, and I don't have virtual realities. Mm-hmm. So my virtual reality will be reading physical books. I'll probably tune up my Turkish oud there in the background and start playing it again, and stuff like that. So we'll be relegated to our wards. And just a bit further, you talk about sort of the ideology of this ruling class. It's stakeholder capitalism, which is what's sold to all the governments of the world. You write, quote, wherever we look, whether east or west, stakeholder capitalism has taken root. GovCore represents the complete privatization of the state. Technocracy lends itself perfectly to the administration of that private state. It offers the complete blueprint for how the fully privatized state can manage the public social mechanism that is the people, end quote. And then you talk about how they're warping Christianity. Some of these guys, Thiel just gave 4 talks on the Antichrist, calling them, labeling themselves all sorts of things, including such as libertarianism. But as you said earlier, I don't think they really believe this stuff. It just comes back to what you just said. They just want to rule the planet, and they'll use whatever labels to get people on board, as I think the Trump administration is doing. And these people are effectively useful idiots. I see a lot of libertarians today be like, yeah, belay, yeah, this or that, not realizing that they're effectively being, some of these libertarians are promoting these free cities, 15-minute cities. And so just thoughts on some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, it's quite clever what they've done, because they've taken certain aspects of kind of libertarian thought, such as decentralization, and have kind of adopted that as part of their strategy to get to this notion of privatized governance. So you mentioned earlier softcore. So the idea is a sovereign corporation. They would establish a sovereign corporation that would be the ruling entity of a realm, which is the language that they use. So the ruling entity of a realm. So a realm would be a collective of people that agree that all value goes digital. So everything is recorded on a digital ledger, and there is no value unless it is recorded on a digital ledger. Well, by extension, that means there is no value to anything unless it's recorded on a digital ledger, including your faith, including your emotions, yourself. You have no value unless you exist on a digital ledger. So that's because AI is there and digital technology is their philosopher's stone. They think that technology can resolve any problem, and the human condition itself can be better managed with technology. So yeah, I mean, what was your question? I've forgotten what the question was.
No, just citing from your book how you talk about their warping of these different ideologies like Christianity and libertarianism, right. And I just wanted to add, I think that partially explains why some of us in the alternative media space have remained true. We saw the globalism, the North American Union, all this stuff, 10, 20, 30 years fighting against this. But then you see, the Alex Joneses of the world do a 180 and promoting martial law, promoting police state, promoting North American integration. That's one segment of the more, let's say, conservative category. Then you got the libertarian sort of crypto bros who are all in on Bitcoin and crypto. And I think because some of them got rich, so that's their skin in the game. And now a lot of those guys have been convinced that annexing Canada is a great thing, because why not? And so I feel like this sort of psyop that these neo-reactionaries have run, I think that sort of explains why the crypto guys think it's cool to have a technate, because they made a lot of money now, and that's kind of cool, no?
Yeah, no. What they've done is they've said that decentralization is an important aspect to tackle things like government overreach. So they find a lot of common ground there with libertarians. A lot of libertarians would agree with that. But what I think you need to do, if you're a libertarian that has fallen for that sales pitch, which is what it is really carefully look at what they're actually suggesting as an alternative. Because what they're suggesting as an alternative is governance as a service. So you will be contractually obliged to governance. Now, there is no there's no form of democratic accountability of any kind in this system. You agree to your smart contract when you agree to become a citizen of the realm, or rather a customer, because there are no citizens, there are only customers. So you agree to sign on to be ruled by your sovereign corporation, in exchange for which they say you get a better kind of government. You get more security, you get a better standard of living, you get all the things that you would want. Of course, if you don't want those things, if there's things that you don't agree with, that you don't like, if it isn't the nirvana that they're promising to you, the utopia, then what do you do then? Well, in their model, you get out. Your only choice is to leave. Now, that's fine if you are a tech bro that's made a good bit of coin on Bitcoin, right? So that's fine if you've got the money to leave. I go, well, I'll go and live somewhere else then. I'll go and live in Brazil or somewhere. I'll just leave. But they're proposing this system for everyone, for the entire planet. So there are billions of people in the world who don't have that choice. They cannot leave. They can't just up sticks. I mean, I'm in a similar position. I can't leave where I am. This is where my family are. I've got responsibilities for my family. So I can't just up and leave. So what my only choice would be, if I was living in one of these network state or GovCore technates, is to put up with it. Because silly me, I signed the smart contract. I've now committed to do whatever they tell me to do. So whatever impositions they put on me, that's just my tough luck. There is no redress. There's no system of redress. The only thing that they ever talk about, one thing that Land talked about, was the idea of a complaints department. So you might have a complaints department where you would say, well, actually, you've taken so much of my income that I can't afford food. I want to make an official complaint. Well, we all know what it's like making a complaint to a multinational corporation. You are wasting your breath. So and they would oversee the legal system. They would have things like AI run dispute resolution mechanisms, which would be tantamount to AI courts. So at one point, actually, one of the interesting things is that if Nick Land wrote in The Dark Enlightenment, and bearing in mind that these people have adopted this, as I said, Mark Anderson said, we are accelerationists, so they purport to believe this stuff, is that Nick Land said, if you tried to oppose the founder of your network state or the founder of your GovCore technate, if you tried to oppose them, all that demonstrates is your semi-criminal proclivities. So if you disagree with us, we will treat you like a criminal. So there's nothing, I cannot stress this enough. While they sell decentralization, which is something that a lot of libertarians would value, and rightly so, while they sell it, what they're proposing is out and out feudalism. They are proposing the rule, the autocratic rule of a founder over the city state. And there is no mechanism that they are proposing whereby which you can have any kind of, quote unquote, democratic dialogue within that city state that they've set up. You are ruled by a king, by a techno king, or as they would put it, a CEO of a sovereign corporation. That it's total dictatorship. So there is nothing. It is the antithesis of liberty. Now, a lot of libertarians I know that have gone to places like Prospera, they're seeing the idea of getting away from government, which is as kind of the only good, the good thing about it, that we're not ruled by government anymore. But what is the difference between being ruled by a load of corrupt politicians or ruled by, somebody like Alex Karp, who thinks that sometimes it would be necessary to kill people? We like to influence people and occasionally kill them. So when someone is of that mindset, it's not better to hand over to them supreme autocratic authority. That's a very bad idea. So the idea that Elon Musk or Peter Thiel or Alex Karp or people like would make better leaders just because they can successfully run monopolies, which they've only done because they've got partnerships with the state. So that's not a sensible move. That is not a libertarian move. You're not going to find the individual sovereignty that libertarians are seeking and venerate in a system like that. It's the opposite of libertarianism.
To go then a bit further, and for me, this is again one of the key topics to map a bit out more what this is going to look like in the ground around us. And I know you've been writing. You wrote a few pieces. I didn't get to read the second one for Whitney Webb's City on city states, but about a year ago, I've sort of been sniffing out this direction. I've interviewed even a few people. I've interviewed the president of Liberland, which I think that again, you question who's sort of financing Liberland, and I feel like that is a prototype of what you're talking about, Prospera. I mean, you can go on and on, all these different examples, and even in alt media, I've interviewed Sterling Lujan, nice guy, but he's proposing, he's promoting sort of this same idea in a positive light, but I think it's a bit naive. And then in your book, you talk about deterritorialization, reterritorialization. So again, these 15-minute freedom cities, Balaji, the network state, his startup nation, secession. And it's basically, it's sort of like, it's a wrecking ball to the current world order of nation states and republics, and then remaking them into these, as you say, global neo-feudal city-states. And you talk about oligarchs everywhere hyping network state archipelagos, freedom cities, 15-minute cities, resilient cities. I officially live in Guadalajara, it's officially a resilient city, charter cities, special economic zones, free trade zones, free ports, human settlements, all alternative terms for essentially the same thing. GovCore technates. And again, I give the example. I was shocked 5 years ago to discover that I live in a resilient city, which is just, it's the same, as you just said. They're all different names for the same thing. And then I read mainstream papers, maybe less than a year ago, Mexico City, 25 million plus people. They just came out and said they're going to make Mexico City into a 15-minute city. And I guess they're just going to make it into multiples of 15-minute cities. And they're working on other states now in Mexico. And so it's just, I think this is the plan. And so just again, where I live, just a few years, so they're patchworking this stuff in. So during COVID, before COVID, you could log into your banking app on your phone and your website, just go into your banking app from anywhere around the world, my Mexican banking app. They brought in a rule of geolocation. So now you can't log in unless you turn on geolocation. We didn't have vehicle emissions tests until 3 years ago. They brought those in. So those are now, some people I know, if their car is not up to par, it's declared illegal. So they're removing our mobility. On and on it goes. And so just your further thoughts on this sort of all of these different names that they use and what it's going to look like in the ground, because it's as we speak, it's literally being built out in your city. And soon, I think people are going to actually start feeling they're gonna come up against geolocation restrictions or digital ID restrictions, or you can't purchase some of the things you used to be able to purchase.
Yeah, I think in the short term, everything will be offered with great benefits. I mean, it was quite interesting. We were talking there about Sam Altman offering his WorldCoin by literally kind of paying people for their biometrics. So your biometrics link your physical self. So your biometrics is biological identifier. So your face, your iris, your fingerprints, whatever. That links the physical you to your digital twin. And your digital twin exists in the virtual world. So whatever happens or whatever rules are applied to your digital twin will have an impact on you as a person. So you could just gave, the example of, if we end up in a situation, which is clearly where we're heading, where you will have programmable digital currency, then your digital currency doesn't work outside of your 15-minute city. So there's not a wall stopping you leaving the city, your physical self. But once you're outside of the city, you can't buy anything or pay for anything. So you are geo-fenced. You're geo-fenced into that locale, because you can't, you haven't got any means of supporting yourself outside of it. So this is the kind of thing that they're working on. This is the kind of thing that they're testing. This is the kind of thing that they envisage. What ultimately, I suppose the umbrella term that we could use for all these different things, 15-minute city, human settlement, resilient city, is smart city. And that's definitely coming from a global governance level. The commitment is part of what they call the new urban agenda. The UN call it the new urban agenda. They're very much focusing on the global south and what they call the south, which the southern hemisphere, in order to get these network states or GovCore technates, whatever you want to call them, to get them off the ground. Now, special economic zones of various types, and that includes things like charter cities. They're quite often in special economic zones. These are zones of deregulated zones, investment-free, tax-free, regulation-free zones around the world, that the idea is to attract investment. So the idea is a government sets up a zone in a country like Nigeria, for example. It sets up I think it's the Kigali Free Zone. They set up this zone, and in that, people are invited to go and stay in the zone and set up businesses and so forth, and the state provides incentives for them to do that, i.e., reduced income tax or reduced corporation tax or no tax, freedom from regulations on ownership, like as in business ownership. Overseas people can register a business in your country where previously they couldn't before. This kind of thing. So these are being set up as playgrounds, really, for global corporations to be able to freely invest in any development project they fancy the look of, whilst being given tax breaks, incentives, even support, things like logistical support, so they can take advantage of all of that and experiment to their heart's content and some of these special economic zones include residential areas. So that includes building new cities. And there are a number of new cities being built around the world. If we look at, some of the most successful special economic zones are in China, for example. So Shenzhen, that's a special economic zone which has grown massively to now a population of 17 million people. It started off as a fishing port not very long ago in the 1970s. Now it's just an enormous urban sprawl, but it has a city brain. It's a smart city. It's moving very close to total, basically AI controlled smart cities. So that is the trajectory that they're pursuing at the global governance level. Because that's very much in part of that new urban agenda that I was mentioning earlier. They talk about what they call I think the new urban agenda calls it, what does it call it? Foundational technology, or I can't remember the exact term, but something like that. They call it foundational technology. And then they list what they consider to be this essential technology that all cities must have if they're going to be resilient, quote unquote, resilient, or sustainable. So sustainable, resilient cities. So it must have Internet of Things, Internet of Bodies, a smart brain. It must have be based on some sort of distributed ledger technology. It must have a digital currency. It must have all the, these are the plans that they want to roll out globally. And the interesting thing is that there was a movement where well, what's it? I can't remember his first name now, but a guy called Barber wrote this book where he spoke about how the global parliament of mayors might work, so that city states would have are better suited to the rollout of global governance because they don't have the traditional animosities that or the tensions that you sometimes arise between nation states. He argued that city states are more close, have more in common with each other across international boundaries than they do perhaps with their own governments. So city states kind of understand, like as if urbanization is a kind of unique thing in and of itself. So he argued that for global governance to work more effectively, if you can disseminate the policies out amongst massive cities like Shenzhen or like New York or Mexico City or wherever, then you get more traction with adherence to those global policy initiatives. And the UN definitely started looking at that in the late 90s and started moving towards that. They are creating a parallel system of, instead of international governance, it's intercity governance. So they're starting, things like the Global Parliament Mayors, the Global Parliament of Mayors, which was set up because of with what's his name, Bloomfield Philanthropies, and this based on this idea that this guy Barber wrote about. They've committed a lot of infrastructure to that at the global governance level. They're setting up all these different kinds of investment pipelines to enable, essentially, I mean, even at one point saying that we're reaching out to the philanthropic community to invest in this, which they mean oligarchs. So to invest directly in city states, the construction of city states, without having to go through the national political channels. So immediately circumventing the national government and just dealing directly with city officials for what they call investment pipelines. So the UN is moving towards this model. And the idea would be, if we look at something like what Balaji Srinivasan wrote about in the Network State, which would be a community that starts online and then outbuilds infrastructure by, he spoke about crowdfunding. That it would then invest in the development of infrastructure, the building of physical infrastructure once this community has come together online, perhaps leveraging land or assets or property, whatever that they've already got to build out. When he started saying that, the thought that occurs to me, well, if your community of people that are building your network state are Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Michael Bloomberg, if that's who your community members are, then pretty quickly the resources that you're going to be able to marshal for your city-state project are going to dwarf that of the nation that they're in, especially if you're building your city-state in the global south, where national economies are already broken, if they're not already broken and moving closer to being broken. So that is definitely the model that they're going for, where you've got kind of like these nascent special economic zones or GovCortecnates, or whatever you want to call them, network archipelagos, that are building infrastructure independent of the government, taking resources from the government. And what's most remarkable is that governments are going along with this. They're agreeing to all this proliferation of these private fiefdoms that are growing up around the world, and they are on board. They're seemingly on board with that idea, and pretty soon you could see that you would have a network of nodes around the world of all these interlinked city states. At which point, the nation states start to become less and less and less important. Does it matter so much what the tensions between the French government and the German government if Berlin and Paris have got very close working relationship? that's the kind of model that they are trying to bring about. And you have to say, there's when you look at it, it's working. They are. And what's even more alarming is, as I said, these neo-reactionary oligarchs, this what people would call the PayPal mafia, perhaps, or something. They're fully on board with that idea, but that idea also gels with what we might call the wider kind of traditional oligarchy, globalist oligarchy, who are also keen on that idea. So they've come together with a shared interest. The problem is, well, that it's all a problem, but the big problem from the neo-reactionary perspective is that that's also anti-human. They want to get rid of us as well as the nation state, or get rid of us in our current form. That's for sure.
I want to just comment on. I'm going to share my screen for people who are just listening to the audio, but just an example. Again, I was out in Kazakhstan when COVID-19 84 hit, and I fled back to Mexico, Guadalajara, where I live. And you can see here's the website, resilientcitiesnetwork.org. Guadalajara has its own chief resilience officer, Patricia Martinez. She's in charge of implementing the Smart City 15-minute city plan for Guadalajara. And what made me sort of stumble on this was when I came back, I'd been in Guadalajara since 2010. So I come back a decade later, 2020. And, everything had been pretty static in Guadalajara. And then when I come back, the places, roads in the city where there were 3 car lanes now only have 2. That third lane they turned into a bike lane for the electric green, bus. They're building out massive public transport on the highways, above ground trains, lanes all across the city for these electric green public transport buses. And I'm like, what's going on? Where's this money coming from? This is the green globalist agenda. And then I found, this website. I'm like, what? Where I live is a resilient city? And it's funny how a lot of these websites, he says page not found. And I wanted to find out, like, well, what is a resilient city? And I find out, thankfully the Internet Archive is our friend. And here it is. I found this website that says Global Resilient Cities Network, with support from the Rockefeller Foundation and other funding partners. That's where the money was coming from. And then you find the other white papers. Here's Resilient Cities Shaping a Digital World, July 2020, the document I found. And you go through it. I can't, it talks about cashless. So they want to get rid of cash, pre-crime, AI, bring in surveillance and all that stuff. And so I'm just showing that as an example. And then you'll find this stuff where you're living. And I just wanted to give an example from over the weekend, last week. So we went out of town to the river, to nature, and I didn't have time to make breakfast. So I thought, on the way there was a Starbucks, and I'll get a coffee and a croissant. And the line was just too long. And I'm like, I rarely buy, once a year I'll buy this fast food or stuff. And there was a Burger King. So again, this is in Mexico. There was a Burger King, and I haven't been to Burger King in years. So I'm like, I just need a coffee and some breakfast sandwich. And I walk in, and there's humans at the counter, and then there's these 2 giant menus. And I asked the humans in Spanish, I'm like, can I order with you guys? And they're like, no, like you literally cannot place an order anymore with the humans at a counter. And they're like, no, you can only do it through the menu. And it's not at all Burger King locations here in Mexico, but this one it was, and it's the first time I'd seen it. And I'm like, can I pay in cash? They're like, yes, but the menu, it's like pay with card is like the default option. So first of all, I'm trying to select my coffee, and it keeps saying donate. I'm like, donate? Is this the Red Cross? Like, this is a business. I want to buy a coffee and a burger. Why would I donate to Burger King? Like, it's insane. And then it's so Kafkaesque and Byzantine, and I'm trying to click on the coffee. This is, I think, the nature of this idiocracy, technocracy, as Joe Allen refers to it. I think is very much like the movie Brazil, 1985. So I'm trying to click on the coffee. It kicks me out, or whatever. I get the coffee and I select the sandwich. The final thing you have to do, it gives you only 2 options. Remember, I'm trying to pay with cash, and I didn't have my cell phone, and it says enter a 4-digit PIN, and I'm like, what 4-digit pin or scan the QR code. Scan it with what? I don't have a cell phone and I've just got cash. And I wanted to punch the thing and I just said so. I cursed in Croatian out loud and I just walked out of the establishment. It's just kind of like I literally could not buy food, because they won't take my order and it's used the menu, but scan it with what? Scan like with my forehead, my palm. I don't know. And it's just so frustrating. And this is just like the beginning of the shape of things to come. And anyways, I'm ranting here, but just real quick, just your thought. A lot of these different terms are bandied about. For me, they all just signify the same thing. Technopopulism, technocracy, algocracy, technofeudalism. Was it Varoufakis? Technofascism, Edwin Black's algorithm ghetto, electronic concentration camp, social credit system. Is it all essentially at the end of the day? It's basically the same thing, no?
I think the outcome is the same thing. The outcome is digital control of your life, but then the only question is by whom and for what purposes. So if your life is being controlled by people that have got a deep and abiding wish to install the dark enlightenment, you're in deep trouble. But if you've got a digital system that is being run by a group of eco-friendly kind of fluffy hippies, then you're probably not in so much trouble. But that's the problem with all of this kind of technology, and something that I know you and I have spoken about before. The technology itself isn't bad. There's all sorts of things that we could do with this technology that would be beneficial for humanity. But if you look at something like the distributed ledger technology that, for example, Balaji Srinivasan uses in the network state, that is a 280 or 300 page book about distributed ledger technology, or the using that to create this thing called, the network state or the network archipelago, GovCorTechNate, resiliency, call it whatever you want to call it. And he doesn't specify anywhere in the book whether that would be a permissioned ledger or a permissionless ledger. So that's key. That is absolutely crucial, because if you set up a network state idea or a GovCorTechNate idea, this thing that we've been discussing, this idea of putting everything on a blockchain, if that's on a permissionless blockchain, then suddenly, that might work. That might be okay. Nobody's controlling anybody else. You're just using it as a means of exchanging information, as a means of running administrative service, as a means, in that sense. If there's no ability to use it to centrally control your life, or to change the way that you interact with others through this, your link to your digital twin, then feasibly, all right, that'd be all right. That might be quite useful. We wouldn't need banks. We wouldn't need government. We wouldn't need any of these things. We could run a society quite well using this technology. But that's the problem. The people that are implementing the technology have got a nefarious agenda in mind. So it doesn't come down to the technology itself per se being bad. It is because the people that are investing in it, that are using it, that want to implement it, want to use it for deleterious reasons. They want to use it for oppression. But we don't have to let them use it for oppression. And we don't have to let them take command and control of the technology. It is up to us. It is down to us to say, well, hang on a minute. If you want to build a network state, okay, that's fine. But we insist that it's a permissionless ledger. Let's pursue that path towards, moving things into a more digital realm. But let's make sure that it doesn't affect our real world lives to the extent that you can switch off our access to finance, or you can switch off our access to money. Let's make that impossible for you to do. And then let's see if you're still interested in investing these billions in rolling out these digital systems. Because the answer, I can pretty much guarantee, will be no. The only reason that they're rolling out these digital ID, digital currency, networks, is purely why the only reason that the Rockefeller Brothers Fund is interested in turning parts of Mexico into smart cities is not for the benefit of the Mexican people. It's not for their benefit. I think we need to sort of get a grasp of that, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the idea, I mean, some of the ideas are not necessarily bad ideas. It's just that they're being implemented to control us all the time. It's a constant presence in all of this infrastructure rollout, and it doesn't have to be. It is a choice to focus on that element of the technology or to use it in that way, and we don't. In resisting it, in saying no to it, in saying that's not what we want, we won't go along with it. That doesn't mean that you're suddenly, some sort of Luddite or who wants to, live in a mud hut and drive everywhere on a pony and cart. I mean, it's not an either or. The only firm line that we could sort of draw in the sand in terms of how we're going to deal with this technology is to say that whenever that technology is used for controlling our lives by some faceless AI algorithm, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. We won't accept that. So I think we can resist this as it's rolled out, but we can't do it if we even contemplate complying with any of the infrastructure as it is being created at the moment. If we do that, as I said earlier, if we do that when we've got digital ID linked to digital currency, then we're stuck. We are in trouble then, because if you can't have access to the things that you need to live unless you comply, you're in trouble.
Iain, what is wrong with living in a mud hut, getting around by a horse? For people who are listening only, I pulled up an old photo of me in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia on a little pony horse, where I used to live in a yurt. The sort of the tents that Mongolians have been living in for 1,000 years. I think this photo is from, where are we now? Must have been 19 years ago. That was me, and so that's not that's not bad either. I could live the analog.
No, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's fine. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was saying, look, what do you need to have a good quality of life? You just need, somewhere warm and dry, a campfire, some friends, have a laugh. I mean, we don't need all this stuff to have a better quality of life, but it does. One thing that does kind of, I was talking to someone not long ago, and they were saying about, we could have have small holdings and be self-sufficient and grow your own food and have your own water supply and live off grid, which is fine. That's great. Yes, that would be ideal. That would be really good. That would maximize your own independence. Unfortunately, billions of poor people live in cities already where they haven't got enough room to grow a cactus in a flower pot, let alone grow their own food. So the idea that people around the world can suddenly all buy a small holding and live the agrarian idyll is not realistic. What's going to happen to all those people? Are they just going to be like abandoned and left to the technological dictatorship grid? That those people deserve to be able to live free lives as much as anybody else does. So unfortunately, I think the notion that we could return to some sort of, I mean, even on a basic kind of resource level, we don't have it. I mean, in the UK, it's probably different in other countries around the world, but certainly in the UK, we physically don't have the space to do that. If everybody had a small holding in the UK, there wouldn't be, there's not enough, there's not enough room. there's too many of us here. Probably not, actually, thinking about it. There's plenty of open green spaces in the UK, but you get the idea. If you're living in the middle of London, you're not going to be able to afford to have a farm.
But I also think it shouldn't be a choice. A lot of alt media says the solution is going rural on a farm, but I mean, there's people who want to continue living in their suburban or urban area, and there's nothing wrong with living in a city either, and they should be able
Yeah,
to
yeah.
continue living in the urban or suburban area, not subject to the algorithm ghetto. Just real quick, I wanted to touch on the tokenization part. Your book goes into that at length, and then get to the multipolar world order thing to close out. You write in chapter 17, PayPal and the new world currency, the walls where the walls of the digital panopticon will start closing in on us permanently. You say there will be no escape if we consent. Peter Thiel hopes to make PayPal a vehicle of geopolitical liberation. That's hilarious because the Department of Homeland Security banned me from using PayPal. And I haven't gotten around to it, but I want to file a complaint with one of those U.S. Financial agencies that deal with this stuff to see if I can, just for kicks, to see if I can get unbanned from PayPal. But then it's funny how you mentioned how Thiel in 2009 published a Wired magazine article unveiling his new world currency just as Bitcoin was going live, and then now there's all this talk about stable coins, the Genius Act, tokenization, the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. And I was thinking about this, I think this morning or yesterday, reading your book. It's just it's so obvious now that I'll take, and Mark Goodwin is in the middle, and I'll say, look, if you can make money off of the system, sure, whatever, you do it with fiat dollars, if you can make money off of it, that's fine, but then realize it for what it is, that it's kind of obvious now, isn't it, Iain, that what the ruling powers are doing with Bitcoin, I think it's clear that they had planned it from the beginning to get to where they are today, where they're using it to create the stablecoin world, the Bretton Woods 3.0, a Ponzi scheme on top of a Ponzi scheme to deal with the collapsing debt system. Just thoughts on that, and just real quick, where you see this whole stablecoin system going. I was positing with the cognitive dissidents the other day that Argentina's being bailed out by the U.S. I wouldn't be surprised if they collapse, and that's a great pretext to bring expand stablecoins into Argentina.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I've always argued since I've been doing this work that finance is the thing, really. Finance is the top of the control mechanism. It's the way in which money flows around the world, is the way in which nations, cities, and individuals can be controlled by controlling the flow of capital. That is to me, that is just about, even wars. If we think about wars don't happen unless they're financed. The finance has to come first. Now, again, going back to technology, so Bitcoin is based on a permissionless ledger. So Bitcoin, if you look at sort of Satoshi's original white paper, the idea is a good one. And whilst Bitcoin, because of halving, because it's inherently deflationary, it also is a good store of value. And that's therefore can be perceived by people like Larry Fink to be an asset rather than a currency. Although obviously a currency can be an asset, but it's not a working currency like we might perceive fiat currency to be. Now, could Bitcoin be a working currency? Yes, it certainly could, but not now that huge amounts of it have been captured by companies like BlackRock, because then they won't let it be a working currency, because for them it's a store of value. So that's why you get the US government now talking about offering bit bonds. So they're moving crypto assets. So they've turned Bitcoin which is essentially a good idea, into an asset class so they can use it as an asset. So it's not that Bitcoin itself is a bad idea. It isn't. It's that it's been captured by the oligarchs, basically, and they're using it for what they want to use it for, which is not what we could use it for usefully. And again, that comes down to why are we allowing that to happen? Because there's no reason why we couldn't use a cryptocurrency ourselves as a currency, as a working permissionless currency. We could do that. But again, that means that we would have to, organize ourselves a bit better, perhaps, to be able to do that. And talking about how things progress and how things fit together. So you're quite right. Peter Thiel started PayPal because he envisaged it being a new world currency. So he was from that point onwards, he was focused on creating this idea of a new world currency. So what do they mean by a world currency? What, everybody has got the same currency? Well, no, because PayPal's a payment platform. It's not a actual currency. It's a payment platform that enables the exchange of currencies. So PayPal, the notion of it, which is extrapolated forward, and now we're seeing this at the global level with the Bank of International Settlements, is to have this idea of interoperability, which means that one currency is automatically and seamlessly exchangeable across borders instantaneously. So I can buy goods using a US dollar-backed stable coin in euros instantly. So this is the idea of interoperability with financial products, with money, with different types of digital currencies. So I've got a wallet in the US with a Tether stable coin in it, and I can buy a car and have it imported from Europe, and at the other end, the car seller receives euros, digital euros. So I'm dealing in dollars, they're dealing in euros. It's all seamless and instantaneous. The Bank for International Settlement says will cut down overhead costs and exchanges, and it will be quicker and more convenient. It will be more convenient. But if you can link that network together so that it's, the notion then, actually, one of the things that the Tether, and not just Tether, I'm picking on that particularly, but the stable coins idea in the US is to help alleviate the US debt burden and to prop up the US dollar as a reserve currency, which it probably will. It probably that seems like that might work as global adoption of these stable coins increases. But actually, the notion that Thiel was talking about of a new world currency, or what something Mark Carney called a synthetic hegemonic currency, is that this interlocking global network of interoperable currencies does away with the need for any such thing as a reserve currency. You don't need it. Because why would you, if you were, let's say you were in Etana, the city-state of Etana in Nigeria, you could use the ECNY, the eNaira, which is the Nigerian CBDC. And this is the threat of stable coins. And this is why the EU have been just rushing fast to get the digital euro out. Because why would I do that if I could pay for it using a US stable coin, a dollar-backed stable coin? Why would I bother using a Nigerian backed digital central bank digital currency when in this interoperable global network I don't have to? I could just use US dollar-backed stable coins. Which one's going to be better for me trading internationally? Which one's got more quote unquote trust? Which currency? So you can see how this move by this group to get these stable coins out, how they've done it is unbelievable. The Genius Act is is well, to my mind, it's an incredible sleight of hand that they've done, because the Genius Act that sets up the regulatory framework, and there's a whole history that I go through in the book to how we arrived at this regulatory framework. The Genius Act, right? So they're called payment stable coins, right? So you've got USDC, USDT, you've got PYUSD, all these different stable coins that are dollar backed, and they're called payment stable coins. And you will be able to make international transactions or domestic transactions using them as tokenized versions of the dollar. They are, in every single respect, you can buy a t-shirt with them from Amazon, right? If and when this network rolls out, and it will. They are, in every single conceivable respect, the US dollar, except, and this is what they've done in the Genius Act, except in the legal sense. In the legal sense, they are not a national currency, which means that they're exempt from all the oversight and regulations. So you've got a mechanism between, in the US, you've got groups like the organizations like the Fed and the SEC and the regulatory framework that oversees, and ultimately Congress and the Constitution that oversees the issuance of money, which obviously, the government, the federal government traditionally in the US has got some control over that, but not over stable coins, purely by virtue of saying they're not money. Even though they act in money in every single conceivable sense, they're not money because we've just said so in the Genius Act, which exempts them from all control. It enables over-the-counter trading. It enables they don't have any oversight from the Securities and Exchange Commission. It just opens the door up to what can be done with stablecoins internationally without the American people having really any oversight of it. But also it means the issuance of those stable coins is a privatized affair. It's an entirely privatized matter. The only oversight is through the Office of Controller of Currency, and that is a uniquely independent regulatory body inside the government. So they've really set themselves up with what Peter Thiel was talking about decades ago of creating a new world currency, and that's they're nearly at that point at the moment.
Yeah, and then in your book you go on. A lot of us are familiar with the basics when it comes to tokenization of everything. You mentioned it a bit earlier, the ledger. So you don't exist if you're not on the digital ledger, and so yeah, that's going forward. And I want to ask you about sort of the end game here, the multipolar world order, as you call it, MWO. By the way, our mutual friend Riley Wagman apparently just got kicked out of Russia, or more specifically, his partner Katerina got kicked out by the FSB of Russia, even though she was a model citizen, and they had just replied to her she's not allowed to return to Russia for 50 years, and they cannot reveal the reason why. It's a national state secret. And for a long time, the recent times, given everything that you talk about in the Technocratic Dark State, the algorithm ghetto, I've had guests on like Todd Miller in 2011, 2021, talking about the border industrial complex where they're setting up biometric exit entry systems everywhere now. We saw and the electronic, I call it thought crime authorization, the electronic travel authorization. UK just activated at the beginning of this year. EU is doing it soon, where you have to pay 20 quid, 20 bucks, 20 euros, whatever, and fill out a social credit form. And if they don't like the way you think, they can just deny you entry into the EU, to the UK, to the US, and every country, so on, onward. And then this is why I no longer feel like living in a country where I'm not a citizen, because look what just happened to Riley Wagman and his partner. They had their own farm in Russia.
Yeah, I know.
Now,
yeah,
and now it's like, if that was your property, well, you were just been kicked out. Your visa was rescinded by the FSB, and you just lost your farm. And so, and this goes further into what we're talking about, the ministry of the global ministry of truth, basically, that they're trying to establish in each nation, but on the flimsy pretext of hate speech, this or that. And so it's effectively thought police for thought crime, and then that factors into what you were talking about earlier: the digital ID, your access to public or private services, and then even having first, on the first lowest hanging fruit is your visa. Even in Mexico, politicians now have said if you're a foreigner with a temporary or permanent visa or a residency visa in Mexico, and you speak against, again, they're just floating this now. If you speak against the Mexican government, the same thing's happening in the U.S. You've probably seen, like Marco Rubio and others are talking about, that they will, just based on your thought crime, they can strip you of your visa. In some cases, your passport. I don't know about your citizenship, perhaps, if you're a naturalized citizen. I was doing the thought experiment. What if Rubio stripped me of my U.S. passport? I'd be like, that's fine. I can still come and go into the U.S. with my Mexican or Croatian passport. But I guess just towards this final point of, you talk about in your book, the construction of technocracy and its technates is not limited to the U.S. China is already operating a public-private technocracy. Similarly, the U.K. government, where you are, is partnering with BlackRock and other investment firms to establish 74 deregulated special economic zones. You talk about in the book how, Kissinger and Rockefeller in the 70s, China was developed effectively by the West in this regard, where it is today, right? I had a Peruvian research professor, really, he's popular, Miklos Lucas, who talked about in the 90s, Microsoft Bill Gates came into China, was it Hu Jintao at the time? When he went to the U.S., the first person he went to visit was not the U.S. president, it was Bill Gates out in Washington State. And so Microsoft helped China establish in the 90s its AI centers and all this stuff. And so we've got these, on the one hand, we've got these multipolaristas, as I call them, banging on about BRICS, and it's like, we've talked about this before, Iain, but I just feel like it's a ruse, it's a psyop. They're all in on it in all countries on the planet. Putin just kicked Riley out of Russia for thought crime, and so just your thoughts on this multipolar world order, and then you go on about it at length, and you also talk about the seat of global government will probably rest in the General Assembly of the UN. Although a new world alliance could be established to replace the UN, Xi Jinping has recently been talking about the Global Governance Initiative. So China has just launched its world government proposal. And Lutz's Trust, Lucifer Publishing, who I've talked about before, and I've attended one of their meetings, they just published how they want East and West to converge effectively, and that we must get rid of individuality and accept collectivism globally. So just thoughts on the multipolar world order.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at it very much from how it's the historical development of it. So you can go back to, what Carol Quigley was talking about, the transatlantic alliance between kind of the Anglo and American alliance, looking very much at creating this kind of global balance of power structure that comes all the way through, the Rockefellers, when they set up the Club of Rome. That was to make concrete efforts to bring about this global balance of power structure. Now you look at more latterly last year or this year, 2025, you look at what they were discussing at the Munich Security Conference. It's all about regionalization and a global balance of power structure. So what that means is, if you want, and it's very clear if you look at, for example, a very good paper that was written by a French historian about the influence of the Rockefellers on the creation of the United Nations. It's very much about creating a system where no one nation state, even if it's a superpower like the US, dominates the global polity, because that's a destabilizing factor. So what they don't want is to have one incredibly powerful economic nation and one incredibly powerful military nation. So because that destabilizes global governance. If you're going to have really effective global governance, you want this regional balance of power. So if they can, the ideal pole, according to people like the Council on Foreign Relations, is the EU. So the EU is the ideal pole because you've got a powerful commission that has actually got some teeth that can impose policy on nation states. But nation states exist in this supposed, I mean, it's ridiculous what the Council on Foreign Relations argue, because they, at one point, they argue, yes, you've got this powerful EU commission that tells countries what to do, but the countries are sovereign. Well, that's just idiotic. You can't be both sovereign and be told what to do by some bureaucracy. It can't be both. Right. So, but that's the ideal pole. China, Chinese spokes, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's their de facto foreign minister who spoke at, their de facto defense minister who spoke at the Munich Security Conference, conceded that the EU was the perfect pole. China and its partners are looking at starting the Asian Union. If you look at what countries like Russia are talking about, the Eurasian Union. So this notion of having these large regional blocks, which may contain within them extremely powerful military countries or extremely powerful financial countries. So if you look at the Middle East, you have to say Israel is the center of fintech development in that region. So would Israel become a de facto banking hub of the Middle East bloc? Potentially, these are the kind of things that they would like to see in a multipolar world order. But the point of it is not to bring any kind of benefit to us, the people of the earth, to humanity. It's to solidify control of global governance, which global governance is basically the dissemination of policy through networks of think tanks down to government level. Well, if you have to do that to 193 nations who each have their own kind of view on things and each have their own agenda and that's difficult. That might not work. But if you've got a network of city states that are all on board with your global governance policy agenda, they've all bought the sustainable development bullet. If you've got that working within nation states, and nation states are then subsumed into their regional blocks, then pretty quickly you're going to move towards a situation where global governance can roll out efficiently and more effectively, which is what I would suggest what the multipolar world order is really about. And if you look at things like the BRICS nation, the BRICS group of nations, they've already set up their intermunicipal body. So this is not international, it's intermunicipal. So it's so that city-state projects in Hangzhou and places like that can speak with Sirius in Russia. So it's an intermunicipal organ of governance within the BRICS nation structure. Again, this idea of this growing centers of, I would probably going to be technological and financial power, growing within nation states, removing resources away from nation states, centralizing it in a network of interoperable and communicating city states that then reduces the effectiveness of national government, which makes it easier to govern from a global governance perspective. So that's pretty much, and it's fairly clear that if you look at what the UN have been writing over the last 15, 20 years, that's what they've got in mind.
Well, Ian, it's going to be a heck of a time navigating the coming Hunger Games as maze runners. I wanted to get your thoughts on, you also talk about in your book, again, you've also fleshed that out. We're moving back to sort of, as all of this is moving forward, it's going to be both a global government government. It's going to be networked. It's going to be global governance. It's going to be patchwork city states, as you just mentioned, intermunicipal. You say in your book, your freedom to roam will be geofenced by AI linked EVs. Your assets and rights will be on chain and limited by the Praxis AI's application of the social credit system rules on its unified ledger, which will be hosted on the Praxis arm of the Finternet. Any behavior that isn't already restricted by your programmable Praxis digital currency will be policed by AI surveillance and attack drones. The prospect of the majority of Praxis's customers enjoying a freer and more abundant future is extremely unlikely. Of course, you're using the example of Praxis. And just to get your thoughts on what to do, I'm thinking of, of course, figuring out the threat that's in front of us is step one, right? You talk about that in your book as well. Working on resisting all of this as much as possible, not complying. Just yesterday, I was at the shop and I picked up another contingency. So I've got my ISP internet. Yes, I've got a Starlink. I just bought this yesterday. It's here in Mexico. It's called Byte. So it's like it works off the cell phone system and it can give me internet as well. So I've got a third contingency. I'm about to buy a hard drive. Windows 10 just became obsolete, and so I'm not getting Windows 11. I'm going to buy a third hard drive to install Linux on, so I can still have Windows 10 and Linux, de-Googled phones. So these are some near-term solutions. You say in your book, we only need to peaceably decline to obey the oligarchs' demented edicts, quit subscribing to their insane schemes, and build something truly better. And in so doing, finally and irrevocably take back our lives, our communities, and our world. And when you say they're demented edicts and insane schemes, I'm thinking of myself at Burger King screaming at the menu, and I'm like, no, I'm not doing QR. I'm just not going to do any. I'm not going to participate in this dystopian madness. So what to do? Iain?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a point that I probably didn't make very well earlier. When you were talking about Sam Altman offering his WorldCoin to people by trying to bribe them, right? So this is, I mean, obviously it's not Sam Altman personally, but it's his project. That's part of their gig, is trying to bribe people to submit their biometric data to use their WorldCoin. So let's be clear about that. They really, really want us to do all this stuff, to the point where I'm sure when it really kicks in, probably as we get closer and closer to 2030, there will be so many incentives. You'll get twice the interest rate on your digital currency that you get on your normal fiat currency. You'll get loads of things will be cheaper if you buy it using digital currency than it is if you buy it using traditional financial rails. Now, there will be so many incentives. We will be swamped in incentives. And everybody was going, well, why the hell would you want to use all those rubbish legacy payment systems and cash when you could get everything half price if you pay for it digitally? They will do that. They will do it. And unfortunately, a lot of people will go for it. But that's like just like the honey in the trap, it's just the law to get people in there. But the point is, they really want us to get in there. I mean, they're moving heaven and earth to get us into the system. They are absolutely trying everything they can. And we just had the British government say that unless you get digital ID, you won't be able to work in the UK, which is nonsense. It is nonsense. The legality of that, I think, is highly questionable. But anyway, they're just downright threatening people. Get digital ID or else. So why? This is the question. This is what I'm trying to get to. Why? Why are they so intent on getting us into this system? They're intent on getting us into the system because once we are in it, as I've repeated a number of times throughout this, we're in trouble. We are in deep trouble. Your ability to protest, your ability to speak out, your ability to just to be an individual will be suppressed and oppressed systematically by the system. That's why they want to get us in there. But also what that tells us is they need us to go along with it. We have to go along with it. if we don't go along with it, which is entirely possible, if we start taking every step we can and taking every measure we can not to go along with it, and if we do that in sufficient numbers, this whole thing that they've constructed will fall flat on its face. It won't work. It won't work unless we adopt it. Now, I've been sort of screaming that out, until I'm going blue in the face, just saying, don't adopt it. There is no point at which accepting a little bit of digital ID will be okay. Now, I'm in the UK and I have to have a driving license. I have to have one. If I don't have one, I'll get arrested. So I have to have one. Now, that means that I will, when they move over to a digital ID license, when my current license runs out, I'll have to get a digital one. I will have to do that. So here's me saying no to digital ID, and yet saying at the same time, but I will have to get a digital driving license. And that is the great danger. But there is so much. So I can get a digital driving license, but that doesn't mean that I have to use my bank card to pay for everything or buy things online. Okay, you've got me with the digital driving license. I'll have to have one, but I'm not using it for anything. I'm not going to buy anything. If they say to me, prove who you are with your digital driving license, I will say no, I won't. And if I have to prove myself using that digital license, I won't do it, whatever it is. So that means that the sacrifice I will have to make, and other people that make similar choices will have to make sacrifices, but only short-term sacrifices. Like, sure, I can't go to the cinema because I need my digital ID to get in the cinema. All right, big deal. I can't go to the cinema. Well, why don't me and a few mates get a big screen and do our own cinema? This kind of thing. We will have to adapt to our new reality without digital ID in the short term if we're a small minority. But if the numbers get up to about 10, 15, 20% of the population that are not going along with it, there'll be loads of businesses that will look at that and go, hang on a minute, that's a big market there. If businesses, of course, businesses will cater to it. I've called it the non-digital market. Well, if we create the non-digital market, businesses will cater to it. And then suddenly, progressively, our struggles over the last 3 or 4 years where we've had to, because our lives will be impinged upon if we don't have it, those struggles will become less as other people start catering for the way that we want to live our lives. And then that will give people an option, maybe in a generation's time, to look back and think, oh, I've got digital ID and I've got digital currency, but these people who haven't got that, their lives seem pretty good to me. They're not all starving to death. They seem quite healthy. They seem quite happy, but they can't go to the cinema. But it doesn't seem to bother them. If we get to that point, then it's game on. But unfortunately, in the short term, for those of us that are not going to accept digital ID and are not going to accept the imposition of this digital system, yeah, it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be difficult because we will be cut off from the system. So then we have to adapt to how we're going to earn a living, how we're going to work, how we're going to communicate, how we're going to do all of that outside of the system. But only initially. Eventually, if there's enough of us, we can create a situation where people will cater for us. I'll say cater for us. People will provide the services that we want to buy, and they'll be willing to meet that market demand.
Iain, for those 10, 15% dissenters, Curtis Yarvin is just from his orbital authority going to send Palmer Luckey's annual drones and have us, what do you call those? Hit us with horse tranquilizers, and then we'll be dragged to the virtual virtual wards. Again, just yesterday when I went to buy this mobile internet device at the Walmart, and I tried to think because I know they were going to ask me for my phone number. Any purchase you make, hey, what's your phone number? And I thought, what's the most effective way, the shortest, concisest way I can get this across? And I was thinking of, it was a bit of a stretch given I was born in the US, but people always say you are where your forefathers come from. And I've lived in Croatia and Croatian citizens. So my parents came from Yugoslavia, Croatia. And I told the cashier and bagger, the Mexican, I said, I come from communist Yugoslavia. And I find it strange that to buy bread or milk, I have to provide a number. Like, is this the Soviet Union? And to get that point across. And I think it actually kind of worked. And the cashier was like, the bagger was like, well, that's not what it is. They give you some deductions points back. I'm like, but yeah, they're creating a profile of my purchases. And then he kind of seemed to get it. So it was like a quick punch that actually worked, where I established this authority that, look, we come from totalitarianism. Isn't it? This is what it is. Like, someone knows what you're buying. And then like that was actually quite effective in a short amount of time. So just wanted to mention that. And then I guess finally, everyone's got a different line in the sand. Like when you mentioned digital ID in the UK, my line in the sand is, as you say, I'm going to resist to the utmost for the longest time. But if it just so happens that at some point down the line, I'll be like the last person where if I have to get my CURP biometrico or something, my digital ID, I'll do it eventually after I've exhausted all other absolute options. But my line is in the sand is not by getting it, but once, okay, I have, let's say, a digital ID. If they then say to keep it active still, you must be injected, I'll be like, disable it. Or they say you must be fully on board with LGBTQ plus trans ideology. If you're not, your digital ID will be disabled. I'll be like, disable it. And so I think that is the point where when they force you to alter your behavior and your philosophical, ideological, spiritual, religious worldviews, that's like, no, I'm not doing that. And then I'll be relegated to my virtual ward. Any final thoughts for us, Iain? And if not, yes or no, best places to find you, support you, your books and stuff.
Yeah, you can find me at Iain Davis, all one word, iaindavis.com. You can find me on my Substack, which is iaindavis.substack.com. I write for Whitney Webb's Unlimited Hangout. Also, I've got some articles posted for you, Hervoye. And I work for, also you see quite a few posts that are picked up by other outlets like Off Gardening, Technocracy News and Trends, and so on. So my work's out there. And I've got all my links to all my kind of social. Well, I'd say socials. I'm only on X, so that's the only one I use. Yeah. So I mean, my final thing, going back to what you were saying, is about how we practically resist this. So I've just given an example where I cannot avoid it, and that'll be the same for lots. So people that have to travel for work, for example, for business. That's their job, and if they don't travel, they can't earn a living. That kind of thing. I mean, people are boxed in to a certain extent, but I think the trick is, look at ways that you can circumvent the system. So, are there letters of notification and things like that you could use instead? It's all very new at the moment for a lot of us. Don't know yet is the answer to that. I mean, I think there's probably legal. Ultimately, it will be a legal process to maybe to try and re-establish our basic freedoms and rights. That we might have to go through that process again after, thinking that for many of us that live in, quote unquote developed nations, we thought we'd done that about 150 years ago, but no. It looks like we might have to do it again. but just I would say just resist to the maximum extent that you can. But don't, there's no point. No, I will not have it. And and ended up being kind of arrested for trying to get across a border illegally. That's that's not going to help you or your family. And there's the other thing as well, isn't it? It's all very well me being some sort of hero going, "Oh, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it." But then I start to think, you got to think about your loved ones and what sort of impact it will have on them. You know, it's not a simple. There's no simple answer, but the important thing is definitely to appreciate that if we allow this to carry on the trajectory it's going in the moment, and if we all submit to it, humanity is in deep, deep trouble. Deep trouble. We can't afford to allow our lives to be controlled to the extent that is envisaged by this digital transformation. None of us can afford it. None of us can afford it.
It's absolute doom that awaits us if this goes through. I saw you posted something about pre-ordering your book. Is that possible? Or
yeah, no. It's if you want to pre-order, there's an email to send. Just send a note saying there's no commitment to buy. It's just at the moment that we want to know how many people would, that we can send copies out to a pre-order as soon as it's printed, which we don't quite know yet, but hopefully it should be ready by Christmas. And if you want to pre-order, go to pre-order. Send the email just saying pre-order at iaindavis.com. And then there's also a competition that we're running as well, so we're going to give away 5 free copies. It'll just be when we've got the emails, we'll just randomly select 5, and then obviously we'll contact the people that have won to request their delivery details. And for everybody else, when the book is ordered, we will get back to you straight away, and let you know that the book is available, and then it'll be up to you then whether you want to purchase it or not.
Well, I look forward to your book being published, and unfortunately, I can, as of now, back in the TNT radio days where I had a good salary, I was able to afford to pay people such as yourself to write original material for Geopolitics and Empire, so people can check the website for your articles, which are there, very well researched, in depth, to stand the test of time. Perhaps if the fortunes change for Geopolitics and Empire, I can once again pay Iain to write original exclusive analysis for Geopolitics and Empire. But anyways, thanks for coming on.
Well, you should be. I'm cheap. I'm cheap, mate.
We'll see. With some of the latest developments, the ads that will change, turn the tide a bit for Geopolitics.
Who knows? Who knows?
But anyways,
I do think, this could turn the tide. We've been talking about all this, and it seems very doomy, right? But this could be a fantastic opportunity for us, for all of us. We could create something much. That's why I end the book as I do. We are more than capable of creating something beautiful. There's no reason why we couldn't.
Hey, as one of my past guests, Alex Craner, always signs off with upward and onward. At default is just to give him hell, number one. And so, all guns blazing. Iain, thanks.
Cheers, mate. Appreciate it.